It may sound like a broken record to state the fact that humans as a whole have experienced an abundance of pain, which might not be that surprising considering that pain pretty much comes with the territory of life. But in some areas, one can argue that we've experienced more than other animals thanks to our very own creativity, let's say. And this problem of suffering and misery is not just exclusive to we modern humans, but rather extends to all humans, i.e. all species that belong to the genus Homo.
Okay, let's pass that up. Okay.
Who have sadly been lost along the way. And while no one can fully agree on the amount, it appears that the number of Homo species to have ever existed.
Whoa. Which Homo is this? Which Homo? This looks like it never evolved, man. I said the evolution of man is such a sensitive topic, such a weird topic, bro. Cause what?
Existed sits at around 14, all of who, minus us, have popped up and then disappeared within the last 2.8 million years or so. Now we, Homo sapiens, have been around for about 300,000 of those years, which in a general sense can seem long, but when you compare it to the whole 3 million years of the Homo genus, then you suddenly realize that it's really not. And when you think about just how long 3 million years is, you can start to imagine how much different the world of our ancient ancestors and cousins was compared to ours, which in turn means different experiences, different pains, and different deaths, some of which can literally not be recreated today. And not just because what killed them no longer exists, but sometimes because they involve unbreakable achievements, as seen with this first specimen, who is for now the oldest known murder victim ever. This skull.
What do you mean the oldest murder victim, man? Damn, that's such a funny phrasing. Bro, he was the first murder victim. Damn.
Skull may look a bit like yours or mine, but it isn't, as it doesn't belong to a sapien, but rather a Homo heidelbergensis, a species or subspecies of archaic humans that existed during the Middle Pleistocene. And if it wasn't obvious, this particular individual has, or had, a major problem, and actually two, those being the giant holes in their head. It was clear to researchers who found this unfortunate fellow in a Spanish cave that the holes were what had killed them, and would have done so pretty quickly, causing a catastrophic head and brain injury. The only question is, though, what caused them? Given that caves are sloped, and in many cases have plenty of sharp points, scientists first thought that a fall had taken out this heidelbergensis, during which a sharp rock had pierced his noggin. But if that actually was...
That wasn't logical at all. He wasn't blind. And for you to ram into a rock to the point of having a hole in your brain, wow, that's insane. That's
the case,
insane.
You would not expect there to be two identical holes, and thus making the scenario unlikely. The next assumption was that it might have been an animal, but the problem with that is that there's no animal in Spain during the time that made anything remotely similar to such injuries, which then led to the last hypothesis, as there was one thing that it did resemble quite a bit.
Yeah, I thought of that too. There wasn't a fight in a war of some sort.
Something that the anthropologists are all too familiar with, and that's injuries from human tools. Specifically, the marks looked a lot like those seen from stone axes, which can cause severe blunt force trauma, and suggesting that this person had been murdered. And given that they were done in about 430,000 years ago or so, they are now considered the oldest case of murder or homicide so far, and demonstrate that violence may have been a part of our history before we even existed. And surprise, surprise, it also turns out that this heidelbergensis was not alone in death, as thousands of other Homo bones were found in the cave too, with a few of them showing signs of having been domed as well. Yet none were as old.
Damn, that could be the oldest mass grave. Because who took them there? Oh, were they murdered in that cave?
As this particular specimen. And the current belief is that this cave may have been the oldest examples of a designated burial site, where people who died from virtually anything were tossed into, be it a violent...
That's insane. They didn't have time to bury, or I thought the aliens just didn't give a fuck.
Death or not. And in the case of our poor friend, this early violence could have been the result of a fight over resources or territory, resulting in him having been offed in the end. So overall, not a great way to go, but arguably much better than what happened to this guy, who was dubbed OH7. Now OH7 was not a heidelbergensis, but rather a Homo habilis, one of the oldest human species which lived in South and East Africa. And in addition to being one of the oldest, they were also one of the smallest humans ever, with individuals only being around 4 feet or 1.
That's a pygmy. Yeah, that's actually a pygmy.
0.2 meters tall, resulting in them being very, very fragile and making life challenging for them from the get-go. But in the case of OH7, life, or rather death, wasn't just
Why were the Homo habilis so short though? Was it environmental factors? What was it?
challenging, it was downright unfair. And as
Yeah, the skin tone is insane. This one was definitely doing a skincare routine, man.
another case of a death that is no longer possible. And not because he holds any first-time achievements, but
Really?
instead because he was killed by something or some things which no longer exist, extinct animals. This individual in life would have lived in an ancient wetland area where a variety of predators thrived. And it seems that one day, while out for a drink, he was attacked by one of the worst things you could possibly run into, a crocodile, and a giant one at that. And not just any old giant crocodile, but rather the largest true
Yo. Yo. I can imagine how regular crocodiles do humans really dirty. And they're not even that big, bro. Look at this thing. Yo. This is, bro. I swear I don't understand why some things exist. I swear, man. Not even in a hateful way, not even in a I don't give a fuck way. It's just like, why do some things actually exist? Because what's the role of this such a big thing, man? It's not like normal human food. I don't think it balances anything in the ecosystem. Even if it does, I think it, bro. This is crazy. That's huge. That will swallow a human whole, even for that Homo habilis to escape. That's luck.
crocodile species to have ever lived, the Crocodylus thorbjornarssoni, a now extinct species which could crack 7.6 meters or 25 feet in length while weighing
7.6 meters. That will be a trailer truck. Yo.
over 2 tons. So in other words, a very unfair matchup for our little ancient relative. Based on the remains, it appears that the crocodile had ambushed OH7, who had managed to quickly turn away, but was caught at the last second, as his left leg bore massive puncture marks. There were also parts of his leg.
Yo, that's graphic. Jeez. I was telling you, bro, a normal human will fit in its mouth. That's it. That's just it.
Caught at the last second, as his left leg bore massive puncture marks. There were also parts of his leg that were completely missing, implying that it had been torn clean off in the attack, which in a hot
Yo. You know, crazy thing is these things still actually happen around the lake sites. You'll still hear stories of people who are ripped apart by crocodiles, man. That's crazy.
mucky wetland was basically a death sentence, even if you didn't bleed out. And yet, Mother Nature still deemed this not to be punishment enough, as in one of the rarest cases known, it seems that he was then attacked by a second, completely different predator, a feline, specifically a leopard-sized one. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it was definitely a leopard that made up the tag team duo, but whatever did attack him, attacked the back of his head, leaving long grooves in his parietal bone, which does align with a leopard's hunting strategy, or at least a closely related Panthera species. And just if it wasn't clear, OH7 unfortunately died, as both marks on his head and leg showed absolutely no signs of healing. Now, I will say, it is technically possible that he died first from the crocodile attack and then got picked apart by a feline, but because the
Yeah, that makes more sense. That makes more sense because I don't think that whoever would have survived the crocodile attack enough to heal. Back in those days, yo, there was no human grafting, bro. Woo.
only took one leg, and because the damage from the feline was in a spot that is associated with predatory behavior, some think it really was a dual attack. And it's hypothesized that after getting attacked by the croc, he may have turned to face it while trying to fight back, leaving his back wide open to a nearby feline, and thus spelling his doom. And for what it's worth, even today, on multiple occasions, crocs and felines have been observed fighting over an animal. However, thankfully, the animals involved today do not include an extinct feline and a massive, never-again-seen-sized crocodile. So this death surely must have sucked. But remember, it's not always the violent demises that are the most painful. Take Exhibit A, for example. This is KNMER 1808, a 1.7 million-year-old Homo erectus from Kenya, who had a troubled history with A. Not the letter, but the vitamin A, which, while being an essential vitamin, can be harmful in large amounts. And too much of it is what apparently killed.
Oh, never knew that. Too much of vitamin A, bro. Where do you get vitamin A from? Hold on. Let's just check that out. Okay. Vitamin A sources include both animal-derived, retinol, and plant-derived animal sources like beef, liver, eggs, milk. Oh, carrots, sweet potatoes, spinach, mangoes, and can. Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Our Homo erectus friend over 1 million years ago. And trust me, that's not a good way to go. Her partial skeleton was first located back in 1974, and scientists immediately noted.
Do you know how crazy that is? Like, how did he end up having too much vitamin A? Like, that's insane.
Her partial skeleton was first located back in 1974, and scientists immediately noted there was something wrong with it, as her bones showed abnormal growth patterns, namely excess bone turnover, and held evidence of long-term massive bleeding. And yet, there were no.
Oh, yo, these are a nightmare in the present age. Now imagine back then. That's crazy.
Clear wounds. And while this may sound perplexing and mysterious, it was actually quite straightforward to the researchers, as the bone growth were consistent with what's seen in hypervitaminosis A, aka vitamin A toxicity, a condition that is well known in both ancient and modern times, with this erectus, so far, being the oldest example of the disease within humans. The patterns in her bones suggest that this was a condition that she dealt with chronically, and is what ultimately killed her, despite it not usually being.
What? Bro, what? Hold on. Hypervitaminosis A is a toxic condition resulting from excessive preformed vitamin A intake. Preformed. Whoa. What do you mean by preformed vitamin? Causing acute symptoms like nausea, vomiting, and headaches, or chronic symptoms such as bone and joint pain, liver damage, dry skin, and hair loss. Most common causes high-dose vitamin A supplements, though consuming large amounts of raw liver can. Whoa! What, bro? Why are you having raw liver? Also contribute. Diagnosis involves a medical history, diet assessment, blood tests, blah 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 blah. This is crazy, man. Wow. And the problem has persisted throughout human history. Arises as a result of altered bone metabolism and altered metabolism of other fat-soluble vitamins. Unfortunately, says our human toxicity results from the ingesting too much preformed vitamin A from foods such as liver. A prescription can be made by ingesting no more than the recommended amount. This is crazy stuff, man. Just finding out that random.
Being a very dangerous condition in modern times. And presumably, given the lack of medical awareness back then, she was taking in too much without knowing it, which on top of her bone problems would have caused symptoms such as weakness, headaches, sloughing off of skin, the loss of hair and teeth, and a lot of joint pain, which is reflected by her limbs bearing the most pathological bone growth. And it was likely over a long duration of time that she had these problems, which thus begs the question, where did she get all this vitamin A? And the answer is that all signs point to one key suspect: carnivore liver, a well-known source of vitamin A. And in some predators of today, like the polar bear, the liver can store so much of it that it could theoretically supply a human with nearly 150 years worth of the vitamin. And naturally, not knowing this probably played a big role in her undoing. Now, while likely not as painful as this ending, another prehistoric death that definitely would have sucked simply going off of how scary it sounds, is what happened to the Tong Childs 2.8 million years ago. In today's day and age, if we find ourselves scared by something outside, it usually results in us frantically looking around us, or if in the water, beneath us, but never really up in the sky. And yet, a long time ago, you might have needed to, as large predatory birds prowled the sky.
Bruh. Eating humans too? Yo, living back in the ages was crazy. That was insane, man.
And terrorized the lands of Africa, and were not afraid to take a stab at the occasional human, or rather hominins, which in this case was a seriously unlucky Australopithecus. And despite this breaking the Homo rule, because again it's Australopithecus, I am including it given the sheer uniqueness of the case, as the Tong child was found with horrific injuries to his face and head, including puncture marks to the bottom eye sockets, while the top of his cranium was deeply scratched. And interestingly enough, such injuries are actually fairly identical to what's seen in monkeys today that
that makes sense.
have fallen prey to eagles, suggesting that a large bird had sunk its beak and talons into the Tong child's eyes and head, likely killing him rather quickly, or at least hopefully, before he was then hauled off to be consumed. But the story does not end here, as his death spawned a new mystery. You see, the Tong child is really just a skull, meaning that the body was never found. And what's more, is that it was located in a remote part of the Kalahari Desert, in a cave, where no other bones were found, be it human or other animals, and thus leading researchers to ask how the skull ended up here, of all places. And this has led to a second hypothesis regarding the specimen, where in death, it, or rather its skeleton, had been used by its attackers to build a nest, before the head eventually became dislodged and tumbled down, which by sheer coincidence ended up rolling into a nearby cave where it would then lie for millions of years before being unearthed once more. So, with all this said, I bet you'll never look at birds the same way again. But something you're probably already weary of is water. While necessary to life, it can also cause extreme discomfort, to say the least. And drowning is often ranked as one of the worst ways to go, which is seriously misfortunate, as this might have befell on possibly the entire Homo erectus species, or at least what was left of them. The erectus were one of the most successful human species of all time, and actually the longest lived, having been the first Homo to not only leave Africa, but also colonize Europe and Asia, where in the latter, they would make their final stand. And as far as we know, the youngest erectus fossils ever, dating to about 110,000 years ago, came from the island of Java, and strangely enough, all of them perished in a mass death event. To be exact,
Yo. First of all the way in the islands of Java, that's a distance. They were out there, bro. They were out there. Wow.
nearly 100 years ago, a research team on the island stumbled upon a graveyard of over a dozen erectus specimens, who were all adults and were mangled together in one spot. And given the lack of evidence for disease, physical wounds, or old age, it was presumed that they all had died at the same time from one thing. But the question is, what exactly could have done it? Well, based on the type of sediment in which they were found, it was concluded that a flood was possibly a part of the answer, with the belief
Especially in Indonesia, that's really a feasible story. That makes a lot of sense.
being that all the bodies had been swept away by floodwaters down to a narrowing river, where they then ended up getting trapped in a logjam, thus forming a kind of carcass jam, I guess, which eventually fossilized. But this does not necessarily mean that they were killed in said flood, but rather they were just swept away by it at some point. However, for now, it is still believed that a mass drowning was behind the actual deaths. And one more narrowed down idea is the belief that a